In today's video, I'm going to take you on a journey inside the menus of the Nikon Z7. Now bear with me, I know that sounds really boring on the face of it, but this isn't going to be one of those videos where I go through every single menu option in this camera, because frankly, those kind of videos are quite dull. Instead, I'm just going to focus on the key settings and features that I feel really makes this a very strong landscape photography camera. And I'm going to really try and focus on how I have set this camera up to try and excel within that particular niche. So hopefully this will be particularly interesting for anyone using any of the Nikon mirrorless cameras for landscape shooting. So the Z5, the Z6, the Z7, the Mark IIs, even the Z50. Whilst not all of the menu options I cover will be in the F-mount bodies, a lot of them will be, so it should actually be useful for anyone that shoots with Nikon. And if you don't shoot with Nikon, well, hopefully I don't bore you to tears with this video and you get a good insight into what my settings methodology is with these cameras. So without further ado, let's jump in. Let's start with the I menu, which is found under this little I button here over on the right hand side on the Nikon mirrorless bodies. I'll first show you how to set this up. So if you just go to menu and then you go to custom setting menu and down to controls, you'll find it right at the top there. And this is really useful as it allows the user to create a little toolbox of the features that they use most regularly, and I tend to find that I use this feature all the time. So if I just show you what's in my toolbox here, if we start over on the left hand side, we've got exposure delay mode, and this is fairly self-explanatory, but if I just take a shot, it creates a momentary delay between engaging the shutter and the picture being taken, which is really important on high resolution bodies like the Z7 for maintaining image sharpness and mitigating against vibrations that I put in with my own hands. You can achieve the same thing by going to the Selftimer, but I tend to find on these particular bodies that option tends to get reset quite a lot when you turn the camera on and off, and it's really annoying, whereas the exposure delay doesn't, so that's why I use that. I tend to find it's better. The only time that I won't use exposure delay is if I'm using a cable release, in which case I'll turn that to off, but most of the time I just set it to the max of 3 seconds. White balance, the vast majority of the time I set it to auto and keep overall temperature. I'd say 80% of the time it does a good job, but for any reason I need to change that out in the field, then I can easily do that with the press of a button here, and I can always change that in post as well too. Monitor viewfinder brightness, this is quite useful I find. So if I'm shooting astrophotography, I'll tend to make the LCD darker, and if I'm shooting on a very bright day, then I'll tend to make it brighter. So it gives me that adaptability out in the field. Metering, most of the time I leave it on matrix metering, but this allows me to change it to spot metering, which I occasionally use. Choose image area, very useful. Obviously you can go full frame, DX, 5:4, 1:1, 16:9. I tend to find it more it enables me to more easily visualize the crop I'm going for out in the field, and I can shoot to it with a greater degree of accuracy, and I find it's a really useful feature personally. Next, image quality. So I always shoot in RAW. I very rarely shoot in JPEG, but this is more an insurance policy to make sure that I haven't accidentally changed those image quality settings somehow. I've been there and done that and made that mistake, and it's very painful indeed. So yeah, this just gives me that peace of mind that I'm shooting the way that I need to. Just as a separate side note, for RAW settings, I shoot uncompressed RAW, and I also shoot at 14-bit RAW. Okay. Next, split screen display zoom. This is a very interesting feature, so if I just move you over here, essentially it allows you to judge sharpness in different areas of your image. So if we just look at our dancing cat here relative to the background as I grab the focus wheel, you can really easily judge how that sharpness actually changes from front to back. And it's particularly useful if you're shooting at narrow apertures and you want to judge hyperfocal distance in your image, and you want to make sure that you get a good compromise between foreground and background sharpness. The only downside is that you can see that these two boxes move independently from each other when they move left and right, but up and down you cannot do that, and I don't know why, because it really limits the usefulness of this feature when shooting in landscape. However, if you flip orientation to portrait, it's very useful indeed. Next, we've got set picture control, which, because I'm shooting in RAW, doesn't actually impact my images, but if I'm out in the field wanting to shoot black and white images, then I'll often switch this to monochrome, as it enables me to more easily visualize the scene I'm going for. Peaking highlights, so this is focus peaking strength, which I can change at the top, and I can also change the color, and because I'm colorblind, I've got mine set to yellow. So if we just turn manual focus on and off, you can see the peaking comes on in the middle there. It's really useful for manual focusing. Vibration reduction, because I'm pretty much always shooting from a tripod, I don't often change this, but if I do happen to be shooting handheld, then I'll stick that on. And then finally, I've got AF area mode. I pretty much always use pinpoint AF or single point AF, and then I simply use this little joystick to move them around the screen, or I can actually use the touch screen as well, which is very useful. And then finally, we have got focus mode itself, and because I'm talking about landscape photography here, by and large I tend to leave that on AFS. However, if I need to manual focus, then obviously I can switch that there or on the lens itself. You may have noticed throughout this video that I do use back button focusing, because I've been reaching for the AF on button quite a lot. I'm not going to explain in this video why I use it, because that's an entirely separate topic and I have covered that in a separate video. If you're interested in watching that, I'll just pop a link for that right at the top now. But to set up back button focusing, which I really would highly recommend for landscape shooting, you just go to menu, you go to custom setting menu, to autofocus, AF activation, and set that to AF on only. You then want to go up to AFS priority selection and set that to release, and then if we back up and go down to controls within custom setting menu, you want to go to custom control assignment, and then just make sure that the AF on button is actually assigned to AF on, and it's as simple as that. Of course, I do also use the touchscreen to acquire focus as well, so I can use both the button and the actual touchscreen to do the same function. One thing that I would highly recommend not doing is setting the screen so it acquires focus and takes the picture at the same time, because trust me, it's actually quite annoying out in the field and you'll take a lot of shots when you don't intend to. So I would far rather decouple that. But yeah, back button focusing, I would highly recommend giving it a go. If we go back into the custom control assignment menu, I'll show you how I've set up the rest of the buttons on this camera. Now, these mirrorless cameras have two function buttons which are round to the front here and to the side of the lens, and I think they're very useful indeed. The first function button I've got set up to bracketing, and the second I've got set up to depth of field preview. So if I just engage the function button 1, you can see here that I can change the number of stops of bracketing and also the number of images in that sequence. And then if I stop this lens right down and engage the depth of field preview, you can see how that changes my preview of the depth of field, funnily enough, on the LCD there. These Nikon mirrorless cameras don't actually change your depth of field past 5.6. So it means that out in the field you have to engage the depth of field preview button to actually get a realistic judge of your scene, the way it's actually going to be shot, which is particularly useful for landscape photography. I don't know why these cameras don't have a menu option to override that 5.6 cap, but hey, it is what it is. So I just open this up wide again because I want to hide all the ugly wires and keyboard in the backdrop there. If we go back into our menu, Obviously I don't need to talk about AF on again because we've covered that. The joystick here, I use that to move my focus point selection around the screen, and then if I press it inwards, it resets it and snaps it to the middle, just in case I lose it on screen, which does happen quite frequently. I've also finally set up the record button just up here as a shortcut through to my menu, which I find very, very useful indeed. And you'll see how useful that is when I talk about my menu a little later in this video, but that gives you a very quick access point into that. And the rest of the features down here are not really a concern for me for my landscape shooting. If we quickly go back into the controls menu under custom settings menu, and I go down to OK button, I've also set this in both shooting mode and playback mode to zoom in to 100% magnification. So what that means here is, boom, I can zoom into Dancing Cat, check its sharpness, and also I can go to the images that I've taken of Dancing Cat, and boom, I can zoom in just like that and check my sharpness. Very, very useful just at the push of a button. The next button that's worth talking about is this little button just to the left of the EVF. If you click that, it switches your display mode for the EVF and your actual monitor. And I've got mine set up this way, so I've got automatic display switch, which switches to the EVF when your eye or anything else goes in front of that. So it's probably the most practical all round, but it can be damn irritating when something goes in front of this because it turns your screen off. So I can then change it to monitor only, which just puts it onto the LCD. There's none of that automatic switching nonsense. But then also I've got an interesting setting here, which is prioritize viewfinder, which has both of them off and then only switches the EVF on when your eye goes in front. And this is particularly useful to maximize battery life because it keeps your camera on, but it's obviously not using battery power by powering screens that you're not using. So if I just show you how to change that, if you go to menu, you just go to the setup menu and limit monitor mode selection, you can go in there and change it to your heart's content. Next, I'm just going to show you my image display options that I use. So if I just go into my images here, you can see I've got a beautifully overly exposed dancing cat here. So the first display is a clean display that's got no overlay whatsoever. If I just click up on my D-pad here, we've then got an overview of my settings and a histogram, which is incredibly useful. The next option is showing me where my highlights are blowing out. So this is particularly useful when shooting high dynamic range scenes to show you where the danger areas in the composition are. And then finally, I've also got it set to show me where the focus point was. And this is particularly useful if you've lost track in a sequence of images, particularly if you're doing focus stacking, for example, where the actual focus point is, I find. To actually change those, you just go into your menu, you go up to the playback menu, you go down to playback display options, and in here you can pick exactly what suits your needs. Also, I do use the different displays on the actual LCD for my pictures before I've taken them. So by clicking that, I can get my lovely little histogram up and I can get my spirit level as well. And both of those tools I use extensively. Of course, this doesn't actually, believe it or not, have a display option where there's no overlay, which is probably one of the stupidest mistakes I've ever seen in the camera, and it baffles me to this day that Nikon have yet to fix this. It's completely insane. And the final thing I wanted to touch upon is the My menu. So if you go into menu and go right down to the bottom, this is the customizable My menu, where you can add items in to create your own menu, which is really, really useful. And it's very easy. You just add and remove and change the rank of items with these little buttons at the bottom here. I've actually got this set up on the record button, so I just need to click that at any point in time and it takes me straight through to that. Now, the items that I've got in here aren't all relevant to landscape photography, because believe it or not, I do shoot other styles of photography, and as yet on these cameras I don't believe you can store different menu layouts, but that would be a nice feature if you could do that. But basically you can see I've got interval timer shooting at the top, so this is particularly useful if you're shooting time lapses or star trails, for example, for astrophotography. Next is the time-lapse movie setting, which I occasionally use when I'm out and I want to capture some nice sort of B-roll sequences. Focus shift shooting, so this is for focus stacking. This is a very useful automatic feature. More often than not, I would say 80% of the time I just manually focus stack without using this feature, but if the depth of field challenges within a scene are quite acute because I'm having to shoot at wide apertures or my foreground is particularly close to the lens, then this feature is very powerful indeed. Low light AF, really useful to switch on and off. It's better during the day to have it off, but when those light levels start to drop a little bit, it's very good to switch that on because it'll improve your AF performance quite significantly. AF activation, this just allows me to switch back button off just by switching that back to shutter whenever I want. And the rest of the options here don't really actually concern landscape photography too much. I've got limit monitor mode selection here, so if for any reason I want to change the EVF functions and the LCD functions, I can quite easily. And then also I've got airplane mode, format memory card, and other functions with regards to connecting my camera to smart devices in this menu as well. So it makes it really nice and easy to get to them just at the press of a button. I'd really recommend setting up a My Menu, and if you can map it to the record button like that, it makes it so easy to get into some of these features very rapidly out in the field. So that's me done. Hopefully I didn't bore you to tears with that run through of this camera. Now it's entirely possible that there are some features and settings that I've totally overlooked, and that's the joy about YouTube. It's very much a two-way learning process. I learn so much just from the comments on my videos. So if you do have any suggestions on any features or menu options that I've overlooked that could potentially be very useful for landscape photography, pop them down below and I'd be really interested to read those. But thanks very much for watching today's video. If you haven't yet subscribed, click that button below and don't forget to give the video a little like, and I'll see you next time out, which I'm not sure when it will be because at the moment we're back in C19 lockdown here on the Isle of Man, so photography and video making in general is a bit challenging at the moment, but hashtag first world problems. In the big scheme of things, it's nothing. So I'll see you all sometime soon. Take care.